Joey W. wants to know, can you contrast the advantages and disadvantages of dynamic idle? Yeah, okay. Dynamic idle. Oop, wrong screen. So dynamic idle, for those who don't know, is, there we go. Dynamic idle is configured in the PID tuning tab, PID profile settings, and it is, oh, right here, dynamic idle is off because D-shot telemetry is off. And what dynamic idle does, no, that's not what I meant to do. Let's try again. Figure it out. Figure it out. Figure it out. Come on, Bardwell. Figure it out. Can't figure out if you're coming or going. Dynamic idle is configured right here. And what it does is it sets... Okay, so here's the problem that dynamic idle solves. If a brushless motor spins too slowly, it will stall. Okay? That's the short version. So there is a minimum RPM below which the brushless motor must not go during flight. And the way that Betaflight and many flight controllers traditionally deal with this is with a throttle target. So you will say, don't let the throttle go below 10%, or 7.5%, or 5.5%. It's some percent of the throttle value. And you'll just basically guess about what throttle value will keep the motor spinning without stalling. Fine. The problem with that is that actually the throttle percent is not the thing that causes a motor to stall. Okay? What causes a motor to stall is when the RPM is too low. And when the RPM, but the problem is that the flight controller doesn't know the RPM of the motor. So we just set a throttle percent and we cross our fingers, we do a little testing, and then we get on with our lives. Well, with Betaflight, what version of Betaflight did this start? Was it 4.2? Was it 4.1? In recent versions of Betaflight, if we go to the Motors tab, we can turn on bidirectional D-shot. And bidirectional D-shot means that the ESC reports the RPM of the motors back to the flight controller. And there are various reasons why this is useful, but one of them is that now the flight controller can know the actual RPM of the motors at all times. And what that lets us do is turn on dynamic idle. So with dynamic idle, you will set a target RPM below which the motor may not go. And the flight controller basically runs a very simple PID loop that watches the RPM of the motor, and if it's getting down near that value, then it raises the throttle to keep the motor from going to that value. And that's what dynamic idle is. This is good because the RPM of a motor is not static based on the throttle position. So if I set the throttle to 5, think about this. If I set the throttle to 5%, and now the motor's spinning at a certain RPM, now imagine that I take a big fan and I blow the fan down on the motor. Like imagine a really powerful fan, like a wind tunnel kind of situation. Can you see that the motor will speed up as the fan blows on the motor, even though the throttle position hasn't changed, because the moving air will unload the prop and help the prop spin faster. And in fact, we could do the opposite. We could blow the fan from the other side, from the bottom, and it would cause the motor to slow down. Well, we don't have giant fans blowing on our motors in real life, but we do have dynamic movement of the quad. As the quad is moving through the air, the throttle the RPM can come up and come down. And dynamic idle allows the motor to go lower in the throttle range if it wants to without stalling. And that's basically the advantage of dynamic idle. Disadvantage of dynamic idle: in older implementations of dynamic idle, it wasn't as well implemented and could cause the motors to surge and not idle as low. And it used to be a little more difficult to tune dynamic idle because you want the motors to go to low values at idle because it makes the quad fly better. So in modern versions, as long as you take the guidelines from the Betaflight devs and set a good value, I don't think there's a lot of disadvantages, and I think you should try it. The only thing you should do is make sure that you're setting a good value for dynamic idle based on the motor that you've got. Where's the, why did it link to this page? That's actually the older version of dynamic idle. Here, how about this? Oh yeah, 1 month ago. So I don't know. Go watch this video from UAV Tech for 1 month ago about dynamic idle if you want to know more, and he'll help you get it set up right. But yeah, I think it's worth trying out. So a little bit of a longer answer, but a little bit of a technical one.